Shalom, and welcome to Contextual Bible Study. My name is Denny Thompson. Today we're doing our fifth part in this five-part series on Israel, focusing on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism being the fact that some people are trying to say that Israel has no right to exist. So we began with Christian anti-Semitism, then Muslim anti-Semitism, and then these two parts on anti-Zionism, and now today. Olive tree lessons. And you might be wondering, olive tree lessons, what does that have to do with the rest of it? It'll be clear here in just a little bit. But today we're going to focus on God's heart towards Israel and what our heart is supposed to be if we declare ourselves to be Christians. So, olive tree lessons. Okay, and this picture right here is from the Garden of Gethsemane. Some of these trees may be as old as 2,000 years, amazingly. Some of the trees may be even the tree that Jesus sat next to or leaned against. Okay? Now, I showed you this slide before a few sessions back, but I want to look at it again. Abraham Lincoln was asked the question, do you think God is on our side? This was during the Civil War. He was asked this question. Okay? And he said, what I want to be is on God's side. Now, I think that answer is incredibly profound. It's an answer that really indicates it's not about him, it's about what God wants. Okay, so our Christian response to Israel and to all these attacks on Israel, what should it be? Now, that's what I've been focusing on these previous four sessions, but we want to look at that. What does God have to say? If we want to be on God's side, what does God say about all of this? Now, I'm repeating the next two slides here, but I just want to focus on this again. Okay, the Bible says in Chronicles, for the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth. So we can kind of picture that, that's this visual, this Hebraic visual of God focusing on the entire world. Okay? And in this, for this is what the Lord Almighty says, after the glorious one has sent me against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. So, we have the eyes of God focused on the world, but the apple of his eye is Israel. Now, what's interesting is that literally means what is literally interpreted, the little man in his eye. That's this Hebraic picture. But what it is a pupil. So that means that God's, as he looks at the whole world, his pupil is on Israel. So that's huge. That's just gigantic. And there's many other verses in the Bible to point that out. This is his focus because it's been the center of so much of his plan from the beginning, really. Now, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you, and I will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles. So this was to be the mission of the Jewish people that he chose and this land that he chose. Okay, he's going to establish a covenant with them, and he's going to make these people a light for the Gentiles. Now, I think most of you probably watching this, they are Gentiles. So that means this covenant that we claim, the God's covenant that was fulfilled through Jesus, is a covenant that was established right here, okay, right in Israel. And we're connected to it, as we'll look at today, very much so. And also, this nation was a light to the Gentiles, which is us. So such an important thing. Now, even the construction of the temple, okay, this is the temple of Herod's day, which would be the temple when Jesus was there. Even this very construction, the center part was for Israel only, where the actual temple is. But most of the Temple Mount is Gentile court. So very clearly, it was God's heart, and even in this design of this temple, that the Gentiles are to be included. And this is going to be gradually increased more and more, but even by this very design. If we look back, remember when we talked about feeding of the 5,000 and 4,000? This is another of these really clear lessons that God has given us. Okay, in the land of the 12, now see right above the Sea of Galilee, it says land of the 12. That's a Jewish area. Okay, and I think we know that by now because we've studied this a lot. Capernaum's there and all these towns where the disciples are from. Well, this is where Jesus performed the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 in that area. Okay, why is that important? Because there were 12 baskets left. And he was saying by that, I came for the Jews. I came for this land of the 12. Then there was another miracle that he did, a feeding of the 4,000. And see where it says land of the 7 to the right side of the Sea of Galilee? Okay. All right, that area over there is a Gentile area. It was called the land of the 7 because that's where 7 original nations were chased out by Joshua when he came in the country. They were forced out of some of these areas, and when the Jews came in, and that's where they settled. There were 7 tribes or 7 nations. All right, so then this is called the land of the 7 for that reason. When Jesus went here, he fed 4,000, and how many baskets are left? 7. So we have this laid out throughout the scriptures. There's lots of these things. The Bible's amazing because it's like this giant puzzle, and these pieces keep fitting together. So here's the land of the 12. We're looking at the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee, right up here. Very beautiful area where like 75% of Jesus' ministry was. And right across the Sea of Galilee is the land of the 7, and sometimes called the Decapolis. A lot of stories over here, like Legion. Okay? So Jesus is now saying he came not only for the Jews, but also the Gentiles. Now, Israel's disobedience and punishments through history. Okay, so obviously it's not all a great story. There's a lot of issues here. So let's just do a really quick review of it. Now, he, meaning Solomon, is the one to build a house for my name. Okay, so Solomon had this first temple built. Okay, and that was a glorious event. It was a fantastic temple. But about 400 years later, because of disobedience, God allowed Babylon to come in and destroy the temple and chase the people out. Okay, that was because of disobedience, because they did not follow God's plan, his law. And the Jews were taken into exile to ancient Babylon. And this happened as a result of all this. Okay, so that was a tragedy. All right, so just following us through now. Then Cyrus of Persia, eventually Persia gets involved. They're going to take over the Babylonian area. He's going to allow the Jews to return and to rebuild their temple. Okay, in 538, which 70 years later, he's going to allow this to happen. And he's actually going to even help promote it and fund it. So there they go. They're going back. The temple was rebuilt, okay, with their permission. It was not as beautiful. It's called Zerubbabel's temple at that time period. Because the Bible said many of the priests who had seen the former temple, which is Solomon's, they wept aloud. So it wasn't nearly as glamorous as Solomon's temple, but it was a temple still. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, here's Herod's temple, greatly enlarged in 17 AD is when it pretty much was finished here, at about 38 acres. So it's pretty large. But again, because of disobedience, as a nation, the nation rejected Jesus. Okay, and that's, of course, this will be during his time period. Not everyone, as we'll see, but certainly as a nation they did. And Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Okay, and the people many of them were killed, exiled, brought into slavery. It was horrible. Okay, if they rejected Jesus, then did Jesus reject them? Okay, so that's the question. As a nation, if they rejected Jesus, did he reject them? Now, obviously, they didn't all reject Jesus, or if you are a Christian, you would not be here today, because the Jews who did not reject Jesus, the disciples and all these other followers that eventually came into the fold there, spread the message around the world. And that's how Christianity spread. But anyway, the question, though, is as a nation, did he reject them as a nation? These are some profound questions we need to look at. So let's go to what Paul said. In Romans 11, we're going to look at that chapter quite a bit today because that relates to the olive tree a lot. And you'll see what that's about. I asked then, did God reject his people? And he answered, by no means. Very much in the exclamation type statement. Absolutely not, Paul is saying. God did not reject his people. Okay, many said, yes, It's just now spiritual Israel today. Many have said that through history and even today, that physical Israel, this whole idea of these covenant promises, it's all gone because they blew it. They disobeyed God. And they say that the church has replaced Israel. There are many today who believe that Israel's gone, it's over, that it's the church. And that's what God's saying here. So we're going to look at that. Is that correct? Is that God's heart? Is that what he said? Is that his plan? So 1,878 years later, after the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, on May 14, 1948, this happened. Okay? By the way, notice the name of this newspaper, now called the Jerusalem Post. It was called the Palestine Post back then because the land was called Palestine ever since it was named that by the Romans who tried to take the name of Israel away. It was still called that. And actually, Jews were called Palestinians, believe it or not, but that's kind of a little historic fact there. But in 1948, here it is. The headline, State of Israel is born. All right. So here it comes back. This is like gigantic prophecy. It's huge. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. This is a fulfillment of this and other prophecies. When this happened, people said it cannot happen. There is no way. It's never happened before. Once the people are spread around the world, usually they just disappear, even as an ethnic group. They just disappear. They blend in and never, ever come back other than this. All right. So that first time, remember when the prophecy said the second time was after Babylon, remember? And this is the second time they came back, because they came back that first time because of Persia allowing them to come back and even helping. And the second time, here we are, right here. Now, originally, all the followers of Jesus were Jewish. 100% were Jewish initially. Then Peter, and it's interesting is Peter, because he's so Jewish, he was the one chosen to actually go out and give the message to the first Gentile convert. His name is Cornelius. He was a Roman centurion in a town called Caesarea. Peter did that. He followed God's message. It was an amazing story. So Cornelius becomes the first Gentile. All right. Not too many years later, after this all started, by the time the Romans was written, the church, the book of Romans was written, the church had become mostly Gentile. So when Paul's writing his book, and it's chapter 11 is what we're focusing on today, the church had become mostly Gentile at this point already, because they were the ones coming in much larger numbers. What then? What the people of Israel sought so earnestly, they did not obtain. The elect among them did, but the others were hardened. Okay, now what does that mean? The elect. Well, the elect were, another word for them really would be the remnant. Those who did obey and followed and chose Jesus as their Messiah, they were going to be called the elect, or sometimes referred to as the remnant. Okay, so there was a remnant all the time, even though the majority of the Jews through time are not going to follow Jesus. And the reason I gave that initial teaching about anti-Semitism, Christian anti-Semitism, and when I say Christian, I'm putting that in quotes, because were all these people Christian that did this to the Jews? Well, I'm not the one to judge, but I have a hard time believing that when I know they weren't following what Jesus said. But anyway, but to the Jews, over time, over history, they began to understand that's Christianity, that we get killed in the name of the cross, that kind of thing. So we had this hardening and this separation from the teachings of Jesus and God's plan. A lot of it, came about because of their misrepresentation, and boy, that's not nearly a strong enough word, of Christianity to the Jews. To them, it represented something totally different than what Christians think it represented. Now, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters. Of course, this is Paul talking again. So that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles has come in. This is verse 25 in chapter 11. So that this whole idea of this hardening of their heart is going to start, and it's going to get much worse through history. Okay, going back to this whole idea of not having this full understanding, we go back way back to Moses. We are not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away. But their minds were made dull. For to this day, the same veil remains when the old covenant is read. It has not been removed because only in Christ is it taken away. Even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil covers their hearts. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is a spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Okay, so we can see this idea of this veiling, this hardening of not fully understanding goes way back there. And of course, we know that happened in the Old Testament days many times. Okay, and many did accept Jesus. Okay, there were many even of the common people. Eventually, if you read the book of Acts, even some of the Pharisees did. It talks about that, how they become followers. And I won't go through all that now, but it's there. Hundreds and probably thousands, okay, but as accepted him. But as a nation, they had a national blindness. Okay, so we're talking about as a nation, because if none of them did, we wouldn't be here today. Bottom line, there's no way. But that's not true. But as a nation, they had this blindness, this hardening of their hearts. Remember when Jesus when he rode down into Jerusalem on that Passover, that final Passover week? Remember, they're all yelling, Hosanna to the Son of David, and he just started crying loudly, not just minor crying, but sobbing, because he said, if you had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it's hidden from your eyes. So there it is. They're not fully getting this, because they wanted a Messiah who would free them from the Romans, as we've talked before, and Jesus knew this was just. It was so sad for them not to understand exactly what his mission was as a nation. And of course, 40 years later, as we mentioned already, it was destroyed. And the days will come upon you, Jesus said, when your enemies will build on your embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within your walls. And it was a catastrophe. Because they didn't understand, they had this blindness, in a sense, this hardening. All right, in verse 11, in that chapter 11, and again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery, he said? Paul asked the question. Is God done with Israel? Well, Paul's response was, of course, not at all. As we looked at a minute ago, not at all. Okay, no, I'm going back to this for a second. This is way back. We learned this parable of the banquet, that where the master wanted to have this banquet, but many people made excuses and they didn't come. Okay, so that the normal invited guests, many of them didn't come. They made all these excuses, and it was very frustrating to the master of the banquet. So he told his servant, go out to the roads and country lanes and make them come in, so that my house might be full. Okay, and this represents this messianic banquet. This final banquet actually is what it represents. When one day, when Jesus returns and his kingdom is set up, there's going to be this final banquet of all of his believers. So, and that was to represent go out. There's another picture of going out to the Gentiles, go out to the world. All right, now God's covenant with Abram, it was called Abram at that time, in Genesis 12 is this. This verse is very well known. These verses. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And that means a blessing to the world. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That was the original covenant. And the provisions of that covenant, of course, what is this all about? Well, many descendants, he promised. the possession of this land, and through him would come the Messiah. And of course, also through him and the descendants came the scriptures. All Jewish writers, with the exception of Luke, okay? But all Jewish, beyond that. In verse 15 of chapter 11, for if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Interesting. All right. So, one day, this is going to happen. There's going to be an acceptance, and it's going to be like life from the dead. Acceptance, we're talking now among the Jews. If their rejection brought such blessing to the Gentiles, imagine what will happen when they accept the Messiah one day. Now, this is going to happen on a large scale, the Bible tells us, one day. And that's going to be something. It's a long road. There's so much history. There's so much going on. We're living it right now. And this massive anti-Semitism and all this assault on Israel. To be honest with you, I can see it's so hard to watch. And it's, all these lies are so hard to listen to. And hopefully, if you've watched some of this, you developed the same idea. I don't know, many of you had this before, even, I'm sure. But it's hard to watch. But there is going to be this time. And it might be because of all of this that's pulling these people back to Israel. And it's already beginning. There's kind of an awakening back to God. As far as acceptance of Jesus, it's coming. It's on a slow scale, but it's starting to come. There is this, with all this assault on them, they're kind of pulling together the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. And you can see it gradually happening. You can see how God is using all of this to bring the nation back to him. And what an amazing time it'll be one day. Okay? So if we even look back like Paul, he was called the Hebrew of Hebrews. Of course, that's what he was. He brought the message to the Gentiles after Peter's first role with Cornelius. Then it was Paul, as we know. We've been reading his chapter 11 in Romans. Sometimes God called us for something that doesn't make a lot of sense. So what in the world? He's calling this Hebrew of Hebrews, a Jew of Jews, Paul, to be the guy who really brings the message to the Gentiles, which is interesting. And of course, that's what we're reading him right now. And he goes on, I am talking to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles. I take pride in my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my people, of course the Jewish people, to envy, that's interesting, and save some of them. Okay, now he knows at this time it's not going to be all of them, but some of them is what he's saying. And this whole idea of envy is so interesting that Paul's talking about this. Somehow the Gentiles, in their acceptance of Jesus and God's plan, are going to make the Jews envious. If you remember back on this story right here we looked at, many weeks ago, remember what Jesus said when he came to the Samaritan woman at the well? He said, "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain," he was talking about the location they were right there, a mountain called Gerizim, "nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews." Isn't that interesting? So Jesus is literally saying this to this Samaritan woman and saying it to us. It's for us, obviously, as Gentiles, but it's from the Jews. And he's repeating this. Remember this. Don't forget this. Gentiles, fellow Gentiles, we need to remember that. That's why Jesus said this in many other ways too. Salvation came to the Jews and the Gentiles through a Jew. Jesus was Jewish. Now I know that's kind of hard for some people to accept. I told you that one story when I first started teaching some Jewish, kind of like context, Jewish back stories of the Bible to understand that whole Jewish world, the Israel world. And I had a little resistance from the pastors of my church. Eventually I did teach that class. But there's this natural tendency of some of Gentiles through history, it's this whole separation thing, where we kind of deny the fact that Jesus is Jewish. And so when we see pictures of Jesus, he looks like some kind of Norwegian guy with long hair that, that's not what he would have looked like. That doesn't matter what he looked like, but but that's our impression. He's Jewish. He was raised in a Jewish family, dedicated in a Jewish temple, became a son of the commandment, had a bar mitzvah. He kept the Passover and all the festivals of Israel. He taught extensively at the feast to demonstrate his fulfillment of them. This is a fascinating story, and I've covered a little bit of this. There's a lot more to cover of how the festivals, he fulfills the festivals of Israel in his life and what he did. So those festivals had a deeper meaning. Paul's hope was because God opened his salvation to the Gentiles, it would provoke jealousy to the Jews. Verse 15 says in chapter 11, for if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? All right, now we're kind of getting right into this olive tree portion. And the first part I want to look at for a second here is how there's so many references in the scriptures to the olive tree. Okay, it's very significant. It's very symbolic. It starts way back here. It starts back at the flood. If you remember, this is actually the first mention of an olive tree. Actually, it was a leaf from an olive tree. But remember what happened when Noah was out on the ark and he was waiting to see if there was enough dry land appearing that eventually they could, this is going to end and they could land again from this flood. And the dove came back to him at evening. Behold, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. Now every detail in the Bible is significant. Every one. The fact this was an olive leaf is important. It's the very first mention in the scriptures. Many references in the scriptures to the olive tree. Another one is the Messiah. And this I mentioned too before, but I'm trying to bring some of these things together here. Well, Jesus was from Nazareth. And Nazareth, where did that name come from? It's Netzareth. It's from Netzer, which means branch or shoot. And it's a fulfillment of a prophecy that he lived in this little town called Nazareth. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. Okay? Now, shoot or branch, that is going to be the Messiah, a picture of the Messiah. Now, let's look further because that's a picture of an olive tree, something about the olive tree. So we could kind of call Nazareth like Shootville or Branchtown in a sense here. All right, so let's look at this. This picture tells it all. A shoot will come from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, as I said. Now, every 400 or 500 years, olive trees are very often cut by farmers. That's a long time, so it's many lifetimes of a farmer. Eventually one cuts a tree because it winds up being healthier for that tree. And then there's a stump that starts to grow. And that stump is a new shoot or a branch. And there it is right there. Okay, that right there is a picture of the Messiah who came from the stump of Jesse. Who's Jesse? The father of David. And the olive tree is going to be the covenant. The roots are going to be the covenant, as we'll see. And Jesus came from the olive tree. He's Netzer. That's him. He's this shoot that came from the stump of the olive tree. Fascinating. And the name for the first Christians was Nazarenes. I went to a Nazarene church for a long time. And in addition to the other references in the olive trees, Israel itself, which we're focusing on right now. Israel is the olive tree. David said, but I am an olive tree. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. Another one. The Lord called you a thriving olive tree with fruit beautiful in form, and its branches will be broken, the Lord Almighty who planted you. All right. Now, if we look at the olive tree a little closer, on the inside, they're kind of gnarly looking. They're not like beautiful trees because they're ancient. They're so old. There's a hollowed out area on the inside of the tree. You can kind of see inside that tree if you look closely, the one right in the foreground. Okay, and then the outside is where the actual tree is going down into the roots, and it's bearing fruit or growing olives because the roots are alive. Because really, the roots don't die. The roots are basically eternal. They're down there and they just keep growing. Even though there's these new formations or shoots, there's all these things going on, those roots are there. They are the foundation of everything. And the roots is going to represent the covenant. All right. Now, there are wild olive trees and there are cultivated olive trees. And I'm showing you this because Paul's going to talk about this, because he's putting all this together as a picture of an olive tree. I love this because the Bible is a big picture book. And I told you before, one of my attractions to understanding the Bible in its context is just that. It's, I got kind of tired in the education world of using all these big words to say almost nothing, to try to sound like you're smart when you're really saying nothing. But the Bible is full of these pictures that are really rich and they're really, really real. So we have wild olive trees that are kind of small, and then we have these cultivated or these natural olive trees. Okay. The wild olive trees can grow pretty fast, but their fruit is kind of not that great. The cultivated tree grows slowly and has a much higher quality fruit. So two types of trees. Sometimes farmers allowed them to grow separately, but if they wanted to speed up the process and get a higher quality fruit, they would graft a shoot from a wild tree and insert it into a cultivated tree. Okay, so there we go. Left tree over there is going to go to the right tree, the cultivated tree. And here's what it looks like when they do this, like this. This little branch or this little shoot is going to be grafted into this ancient tree, and it's going to grow because it's going to get nourishment from the sap of this ancient tree. And these new branches, these wild branches, are going to produce all kinds of fruit, making the tree very productive. So, this picture of the Gentiles, those shoots are Gentiles, being grafted into this ancient Jewish tree with roots that God established with his covenant. The roots are the covenant of that tree. They're going to go into that tree. Now, picture what's going on here. This is so important to understand, and pictures speak 1,000 words. We don't have our own separate trees. We're grafted into the original tree, the cultivated tree, the ancient tree of Israel. Let's go on. All right, Paul said, if one of the branches have broken off, or some of the branches have broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, now remember we just learned about that, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root. Okay, that's exactly what he's talking about here. Do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. Okay, this is really important. In other words, know where we came from. Our roots are in that tree right there. It's not a separate tree. No, do not consider yourself to be superior. You have not replaced Israel, in other words. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. This is absolutely profound. You do not support the root. The root supports you. This ancient covenant that God established with Abram originally, and then was kind of reaffirmed all through history, all right, with Isaac and Jacob, his son and grandson, is eternal. It's eternal. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Now we'll look at what that means. Branches were broken off. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Unbelief, what are we talking about? The Jews. Those who disobeyed and didn't believe and didn't follow Jesus and his teachings. And through all of history, they kind of were against all of this. And today, Israel basically is a secular nation, although it's gradually changing. All right, do not be arrogant, but tremble. Listen to that. Do not be arrogant, okay, but tremble. Wow, this is powerful stuff here, guys. Listen close to what Paul's saying. For if God did not spare the natural branches, because a lot of them were cut off, he will not spare you either. Wow, that's right to the point, okay? It's pretty clear why Paul was chosen, this Jew of Jew, Gentile of Gentiles, to be this person who brought this to the Gentiles. How amazing. I mean, this is really powerful stuff. It's an incredible picture. Now, a closer examination of what exactly he's talking about. This phrase, if some of the branches have been broken or cut, in some translations, off. So why would they cut off certain branches? Because they were dead. That's what the farmers had to do. Those dead branches could drag the whole tree down, so they had to cut them off. Now, that's obviously the way pruning takes place with today in any type of bush or tree, and it certainly did back then with olive trees. And what are those dead branches? Okay, those are the unbelieving and unfaithful Jews who have been cut off because they did not participate in the sap of the olive tree. Another picture of being grafted in, and you, though a wild olive shoot, you, Gentile, have been grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing sap from the root. Here's a cool picture to show how this works. Literally, how they cut this little graft and they insert it into the tree. And it doesn't take long, and that wild shoot just takes off and starts growing olives like crazy. What a great picture. So the root is God's eternal covenant established when Abraham and renewed with Isaac and Jacob. That covenant is supplying the sap, the power, the covenantal promises all the way up that tree, and it's supplying the energy and the life, really is a better word, for all of them in the tree. The Jews who still remain, and all these Gentiles that are being grafted in. No, God remembers his covenant forever. Well, that's a good thing. It's hard to understand. People would say that he's done with Israel, that, whatever he said about Israel and these promises is done because they disobeyed and it's over. So we've replaced Israel. Really? What we're saying is God doesn't keep his covenant. So if that's true, really, all of us have no hope. None. Because if God doesn't keep his covenant, what's the point? Well, he does. Because he remembers his covenant forever. Not just for a while, but forever. The covenant he made with Abraham and the oath that he swore to Isaac, he confirmed to Jacob as a decree to Israel. And what kind of covenant? Everlasting covenant. Everlasting covenant. So at the bottom of that tree, the roots, if you look on the bottom left, Abraham initially established with him. And the covenant was kind of renewed with his son Isaac. And again with Abraham's grandson, or Isaac's son Jacob. So those are the patriarchs. Through them, this covenant was established. And through this covenant comes all the power and the energy in the Spirit of God through that tree, through the nourishing sap for everyone who participates in it. Incredible picture. So as we look at cutting off the old branches, the dead branches, were all the Jews cut away from this tree? Were they all old and dead branches? Certainly not. There was always this remnant of Jews who followed God and accepted Jesus as their Messiah. Always. They've always been there. Because of disobedience, the Jews were spread to the four corners of the earth. The scriptures teach Israel has stumbled, not fallen. That's the terminology used here. In Romans, Paul's citing Isaiah. Throughout history, God has preserved a remnant of Jews to carry out his plan of covenant fulfillment. Okay, so that's really important, and the Bible has a lot to say about that. All right, so this is kind of an interesting diagram here. This is kind of the olive tree with Jews and Gentiles together in this one tree, kind of this picture, this ultimate picture. Gentiles sharing Israel's covenant promises, because that's what's happening. The New Testament speaks of the church relationship to Israel and her covenants as being grafted in, as we just heard, brought near in Ephesians, that's the terminology, Abraham's offspring, of course by faith, and partakers. There's lots of terminology indicate we're one here. This is the source of power of strength. Gentiles are grafted into the already existing olive tree with roots that never die, as we've said. They do not have their own olive tree. Okay, that's important. There's not a separate olive tree. Gentiles are wild branches that are grafted into this existing tree, but allowed to join God's eternal covenant with Israel. They do not replace Israel, as we've said before, as you can see clearly by this picture. Now, there are other references in the scriptures. We looked at this story, and I just bring this up to kind of point out how this Bible is one big picture of all these stories. And Jesus has said this in many other ways as he taught. Remember this one right here? He said, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them in also. They too will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. He's talking about the very same thing here. This theme is talked about many, many places throughout the scriptures. Jesus referred to it as a lot. And Paul wrote this: as far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake, but as far as the election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable, because the eternal covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob is eternal. Just as you, who were at one time disobedient to God, have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too now became disobedient in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God has bound everyone over to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. That's what Paul wrote here. The story's not done yet, as we know. In this way, all of Israel will be saved, is what Paul wrote. Okay, that's fascinating. That's a fascinating prediction, fascinating prophecy. But that's what Paul wrote, that one day this will happen. Consider, therefore, the kindness and sternness of God, sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. There's that warning again. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted in to their own olive tree? Look at that. He's talking about what's one day is going to happen. These natural branches, many of them are going to be grafted back into their own olive tree, the original olive tree, the olive tree that's a picture of this covenant. Amazing. I can imagine Paul writing, he's probably got all excited. I can see him just jumping up and down, how cool this is. He probably wanted to live to see this one day. Well, he'll see it, but it wasn't, of course, during his original lifetime. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles has come in. Now, that's interesting, the full number of Gentiles. And in this way, all of Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. All right. So he considers this to be a mystery. And there's going to be this full number of Gentiles come in. And there's going to be this envy created among the Jews, unbelieving Jews, that they too will want to come back and join into this covenant and be grafted back into the olive tree. Now, and we know the prophecies indicate that all this is going to come to fulfillment. There's going to be quite a future ahead of us here. We're just watching what's going on right now, and a lot of this stuff is incredibly difficult to watch, but God's working. There's an amazing plan going on. In the last days, Jerusalem will be established as a chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and the nations will stream to it. The nations. Okay, that means Jews and the Gentiles are going to be streaming to this city and this temple. That's really quite the picture. All right. Now, we're going to conclude with kind of an interesting, pretty much warning or picture of what he's saying our view towards Israel is to be. This is not a well-known biblical reference, but I want to cover it with you right now. In conclusion, what we're looking at in the distance there is the ancient Temple Mount. That's the Dome of the Rock up there, that golden dome, and that's where the temple once stood. To the left is David's city. It's very compact, not very large. This is, of course, modern-day Jerusalem. And this valley in front of us is what we want to focus on. So I'm going to move this ahead, and we're going to see some movement. This is actually like a little video. And there's a reason I'm doing this, and you'll see in just a second here. As we're going up this valley, okay, it's called the Kidron Valley. That's one of the names for it. And as we're moving up, you can see that road beneath right there. And then again, to the left is the city of David. Right about where we are now, there was a stream called the Gihon Spring, which is the water source for the ancient city. They built this incredible tunnel. But as we move further, we're getting closer to the Temple Mount, and there we are. In that valley ahead, okay, and right ahead of us, very important valley, to the right of us, which you can't see in this picture, is the Mount of Olives, and to the left is the Temple Mount. In this valley, right here, in the book of Joel, okay, this is a warning or a prophecy that is very important to understand. In those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Okay, now Jehoshaphat is another name for the Kidron Valley. As I mentioned, one by several names. This is one of them, Valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided my land. So one of the conditions of the judgment, pretty clear, that God is talking about is the nations who went against Israel to divide his land, to all this kind of thing to his people, will one day be judged in this valley. Okay, so that is not really one that's talked about a lot, but I just want to point ourselves to this to understand that the Bible has a lot to say about this. God had an awful lot to say. I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you, he said during that covenant. So that's important for us to understand. It's very important. It's not a minor thing. It's a major thing that God is really laying out. Here is my plan. Here is my heart. Here's one of my conditions of judgment even. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those that bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the nations will be blessed through you. Okay, as I said, right here, this covenant promises is kind of being brought back, and God is taking a look at, is that what we did? Did we stay with these people, or try to divide this country up, or go against them? Okay. Bless those that bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. Okay, now that's kind of somber, but we need to read that because we need to read all the scriptures. All right, so that concludes the olive tree lessons today, this part 5 of this series. I went through this fairly quickly. I was going to take a little longer, but as I got into it, I just kept researching and writing. I thought I'm just going to go ahead and keep going here. From here, it is going to be a little bit longer before I start the next one. We're going to go to the Dead Sea Scrolls story, to a place called Qumran on the Dead Sea, and the north end of the Dead Sea, a group of people called the Essenes, and they're very important. What happened there, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Many of you, I'm sure all of you have heard of them. And then we're going to go after that to the southern end of the Dead Sea, to one of the most important and popular tourist attractions today, even in Israel, a place called Masada. And that story is really quite something and very important. All right. Now, this is kind of an overview of Jerusalem that we're going to conclude with, this 5-part series. And hopefully we've learned a lot from this. My attempt was to cover just a lot of information to try to maybe go against some of a lot of the narrative that we're hearing all the time. And it seems like it's getting worse all the time. And we as Christians need to be informed. It's very, very important that we are informed. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, Hosea said. He's speaking of the understanding the Bible, but I think he was also speaking of understanding what's going on here exactly, how Satan is working today, and why he's going after this tiny, tiny country. All right. So rather than just saying shalom, I want to say this verse that David said. And of course, this is sometimes called David's city. He was the one that originally captured the area, the small area to the left, and this city is sometimes referred to as David's city. But here's what he said. Pray for the shalom. He said peace, of course, shalom. He would have said shalom because he was speaking Hebrew, of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. All right. And I think that is so very, very important. We cannot forget that because that's God's heart. It's God's heart for us as Christians to pray for the peace of Jerusalem because he's not done with this story yet. Not even close. Not even close. And we are to have a heart for this country, for this city, for these people. And we're to understand exactly how this big picture is all put together, not to be arrogant or, in any sense against this nation, but to understand how God has used them to bring life for us. Thank you for watching today and for watching this series. Shalom.